Hello, everyone, and welcome. This morning, we're going to wrap up our series 1934, A Season in the Shadows, with part 4, How Good Were They? Over the past year, we've taken a long look at the year 1934 in black baseball, and we've met dozens of amazing ball players and their clubs. To wind up this series, I wanted to try and place these player statistics in a historical context and get a sense of just how good these guys really were. That task is easier today than it's ever been because the Negro Leagues have been officially designated as major leagues. Specifically, these 7 leagues are now considered major league. This list includes, of course, the 1934 Negro National League that we've been looking at. But before we dive into the stats from 34, let's pause a moment and consider all of the big-time black baseball that is excluded from this list. The great stars of the pre-league era, like Bud Fowler, Saul White, and Grant Home Run Johnson, still remain segregated from the official record books. The next generation of stars like Smokey Joe Williams, John Henry Lloyd, and Pete Hill are included in the records, but only for the tail ends of their careers. Their primes, which took place before 1920, occurred outside of big league ball. Independent non-league teams don't count either, like the 1931 Homestead Grays, considered by many the greatest black ball club of all time. That club's stars, including Oscar Charleston, Josh Gibson, and Judd Wilson, have no stat line for the 1931 season in the records. In 1934, the 8 teams that participated in the Negro National League are considered Major League. The Pittsburgh Crawfords, Chicago American Giants, Philadelphia Stars, Nashville Elite Giants, Newark Dodgers, Cleveland Red Sox, Philadelphia Backrack Giants, and Baltimore Black Sox. But the independent Homestead Grays, Kansas City Monarchs, and New York Black Yankees are not, even though they were better ball clubs than at least 3 of the officially recognized teams. Also excluded from the records are games against these non-league teams, like Satchel Paige's legendary 4th of July no-hitter against the Grays. This past June, SABR's Special Negro Leagues and Teams Committee determined that 43 independent black baseball teams and 2 additional league seasons deserve to be recognized as being of major league caliber. Major League Baseball has not yet acknowledged the announcement, but hopefully in the future these teams will be included so that the statistical record presents a more complete picture of big league segregated black baseball. My usual source for statistics in these presentations is the database at seamheads.com because it's the most complete and includes all games against top-level competition. However, for this presentation, I'm going to use the numbers at MLB.com and Baseball Reference because they're consistent with the current definition of Major League. Regrettably, this means the Grays, Monarchs, and Black Yankees will be absent from the rest of this study, even though they were playing at a worthy level. Now let's take a look at where some of the stars of 1934 blackball line up today on Major League Baseball's all-time career leaderboards. You won't find any Negro Leaguers on the leaderboards for counting statistics because their league seasons were significantly shorter than those of their white counterparts. Baseball Reference has a list of the top 1,000 in games played, and there isn't a Negro Leaguer anywhere to be found, which makes it impossible for blackball to put a dent in the counting stat leaderboards. So we must turn instead to the rate statistics, the percentages and averages and such. Here are the top 15 on the all-time Major League leaderboard in batting average. And I've highlighted in yellow the 5 Negro Leaguers, all of whom were active in 1934, who cracked the top 8, supplanting names like Speaker, Williams, and Ruth. At the top of the list, seizing the crown from Ty Cobb, is Josh Gibson, with a mind-boggling career batting average of .372. Let me point out before we get too deep into this that none of these black ball statistics are written in stone. Research is still ongoing, and if and when the supplemental list of major league teams is recognized, Josh and the others could pick up hundreds of additional at-bats, and these leaderboards will be rewritten again. Here are the on-base percentage and slugging percentage leaders. Rather than reciting what you see in front of you, I'll just be quiet for a moment and give you the chance to look these over. Once again, all the black ball stars highlighted on this list competed in the 1934 season we've been exploring. Here are the leaders in OPS, and the headline, of course, is that Josh Gibson takes the title of greatest hitter of all time from Babe Ruth. These six men keep showing up on these top 15 lists alongside Ruth and Williams and Bonds, and deserve to be recognized as members of the innermost circle of baseball's greatest hitters. From left to right, Josh Gibson, Oscar Charleston, Buck Leonard, Turkey Stearns, Mule Suttles, and Judd Wilson. In 1934, Josh and Oscar were teammates on the Pittsburgh Crawfords. Stearns and Suttles played together with the Chicago American Giants. Judd Wilson was the cornerstone of the league champion Philadelphia Stars batting order, and Buck Leonard was a rookie breaking in with the Homestead Grays, the club he'd star with for the next 15 years. Turning our attention to pitching, this list of all-time earned run average leaders is almost completely dominated by 19th century and dead ball era pitchers. The only exception in the top 15 is a Negro leaguer, Dave Brown, the mysterious left-hander who skipped out on the New York Lincoln Giants in 1925 and lived the rest of his life in anonymity after killing a man in a barroom fight. Notable names further down a list that continues to be dominated by dead ball pitchers are Clayton Kershaw and Hoyt Wilhelm in the 20s, a trio of 19th century stars, Cy Young, Iron Man Joe McGinnity, and Old Hoss Radbourne in the 30s, and three of blackball's best, ranking in the 40s. Willie Foster with a 2.68 lifetime ERA, Bullet Rogan 2.71, and Satchel Paige at 2.74. In the back half of the top 100, we find such immortals as Koufax, Palmer, Seaver, Marichal, Gibson, and Pedro. And in between them, right-hander Hilton Smith. In 1934, the Texas native pitched for the Monroe, Louisiana Monarchs of the Negro Southern League. After a 2-year detour in North Dakota semi-pro ball, Smith went on to star for the Kansas City Monarchs from 1937 to 1948. He was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 2001. The leaderboard for WHIP, walks and hits per innings pitched, again includes Dave Brown, listed alongside some of the game's all-time greats. Other pitchers from the 34 Negro League season who appear in the top 100 are Hilton Smith, Satchel Paige, Bullet Rogan, Willie Foster, and Pittsburgh Crawfords veteran William Bell. The all-time walks per 9 innings pitch list is almost exclusively 19th century pitchers. An exception coming in at number 15 is a member of the 34 Homestead Grays, Harry Salmon. Others in the top 100 for control pitching who played in 34 are Hilton Smith, Bill Bird, a member of the hapless Cleveland Red Sox, who went on to have a fabulous career with the Elite Giants, and a pair of Pittsburgh Crawfords, William Bell and Sam Streeter. Finally, the all-time leaders in strikeouts per 9 innings. As you'd expect, this list is dominated by modern-day hurlers. Two black ballers active in 1934 make the top 100. Hall of Famers Satchel Paige and Leon Day, who made his big league debut in 34 with Rap Dixon's Baltimore Black Sox. Those career leaderboards established the presence of Negro leaguers among baseball's all-time greats. Now let's take a look at Major League leaderboards for the 1934 season, combining players and statistics from the National League, American League, and Negro National League. Once again, the differences in playing schedules make it almost impossible for Negro leaguers to put a dent in the counting statistics. These are the hits and home run leaders, all white major leaguers. The Negro League leader in hits was Cool Papa Bell with 89, which ranks 125th. The home run leader, Oscar Charleston, ranks 60th in that category with 7. An exception to this trend can be found in the stolen base leaders, where Cool Papa Bell comes in 8th despite playing about half of the games of the others on this list. Another Negro leaguer, Nashville's Sam Bankhead, finished just below the top 15 with 10. Black baseball preserved the running game that had mostly died out in white ball after the Ruthian Revolution. And base stealing and base running only returned to the National and American leagues after integration. This is my favorite illustration of this phenomenon. There were 44 seasons between Richie Ashburn leading the National League in stolen bases in 1948 and Craig Biggio doing the same in 1993. And for those 44 years, every man who led the National League in stolen bases would have been barred from the league prior to 1947. Let's move on to the rate statistics. Here are the 1934 leaders in batting average, a list dominated at the top by Negro leaguers, including 3 400 hitters. Remarkably, all 3 were members of Dick Lundy's Newark Dodgers. Left fielder Nolington Buddy Burbage led the way at 438. Burbage was in the middle of a 13-year career during which he was a good hitter and solid regular, but never a star. Third baseman Ray Dandridge was just 20 years old and at the beginning of a career that would take him to Cooperstown. And right fielder Bert Johnson had a brief but solid career in big-time blackball. 5 clubs in big league history featured multiple 400 hitters. Leading the way is the 1894 Philadelphia Phillies with 4, Tuck Turner and Hall of Famers Sam Thompson, Ed Delahanty, and Billy Hamilton. The 21 St. Louis Giants had a pair with Oscar Charleston and Charlie Blackwell. 29 Baltimore Black Sox, Rap Dixon and Judd Wilson. The 1930 St. Louis Stars with Willie Wells and Mule Suttles. And the last team to accomplish the feat, and the only club with 3, the 1934 Newark Dodgers. Naturally, the 3 Newark Sluggers show up amongst the best in on-base and slugging percentage. The big news for me on these charts is the showing of 22-year-old Josh Gibson, who finished behind only Lou Gehrig and Jimmy Fox in slugging percentage. The top 10 in OPS has 5 white big leaguers and 5 black, all of them coming in over the magic 1,000 mark. Judd Wilson was next among the Negro leaguers at 19th with a 931. Now let's zoom in on Buddy Burbage's historic season. Most striking in these numbers, of course, is how small the sample size is. Just 30 games and 112 at-bats. At baseballreference.com, the minimum for qualifying is defined as, quote, generally 3.1 plate appearances per team game. These are the calculated minimums for every major league team. Excuse me, the National League and American League played a 154-game schedule, so typically 477 plate appearances are required to qualify. And as you see, the totals for the Negro National League teams range from 220 plate appearances for the Philadelphia Stars all the way down to just 19 plate appearances for members of the Baltimore Black Sox. I'm happy to report that the bottom three teams on this list, Cleveland, Philadelphia Backrack, and Baltimore, are excluded from the list of league leaders. So there's apparently an additional minimum requirement that I haven't managed to track down yet. All of this was made possible by the COVID-shortened 2020 season. For many years, those who argued against making the Negro Leagues major league pointed to the short schedules as the prime reason. The 60-game schedule played in 2020 rendered that argument mute, and it's no coincidence that the announcement that black ball was in fact major league came in December of that year. As you see here, Juan Soto won the National League batting title with fewer than 200 plate appearances. That's really what broke down the last bit of resistance to the concept that the Negro Leagues were major leagues. And that's how you wind up with the 1934 Newark Dodgers and their 400 hitters, none of whom batted more than 132 times. I'll leave it to you to decide if there's a problem with this. Now let's move on to the pitchers. These are the leaders in wins, and Slim Jones's remarkable campaign makes him one of 9 20-game winners in the majors, despite playing a much shorter schedule. In winning percentage, Slim finishes just below Yankee Hall of Famer Lefty Gomez, with Satchel Paige third. Other Negro leaguers in the top 15 are Pittsburgh's William Bell and Rocky Ellis, the former Hilldale bat boy turned Philadelphia Stars pitcher. Slim and Satch top the ERA charts, with Philadelphia's player manager Webster McDonald, Nashville's Jim Willis, Ted Trent of Chicago, Rocky Ellis, and Willie Foster also placing in the top 15. Slim Jones's 1.29 ERA is pretty remarkable, and I was curious to see where it landed on the new single-season ERA leaderboards. The answer is 22nd, right in between Christy Mathewson and Satchel Paige, which is pretty good company. Satchel joins Mathewson and Walter Johnson as the only men with 2 seasons in the top 25. But I was very curious about the new all-time ERA leader, a Negro leaguer named Robert Keys, who I knew nothing about. It turns out that Robert Keys, sometimes spelled without the second E, had a 5-year black ball career, mostly with the Memphis Red Sox. And as you can see here, his historic 1944 season consisted of just 3 games and 28 innings pitched. And I'm still not completely sure how it's possible that this is on the leaderboard. The general standard for leadership for pitchers is 1 inning pitched per team game. In the standings at Baseball Reference, Memphis played 114 games. Unfortunately, we only have statistics for 27 of those 114. At 1 inning pitched per team game, just 27 innings pitched is required to qualify for leadership in the rate stats. And that's how we wind up with Robert Keys as the all-time single-season ERA leader with just 28 innings pitched. I do have a problem with this, and I don't have a good solution to offer. I'm really quite confused as to why the 1934 teams that played short schedules were excluded from qualifying, but Keys's Memphis Red Sox weren't. Hopefully, as more statistics are uncovered for the 1940s, this sort of problem will disappear. At Scene Heads, which includes more games in their database, Keys picks up 2 innings pitched, but an additional 3 earned runs, and his ERA jumps from 0.64 to 1.50. Black baseball was different from white baseball. And if you want to try and make sense of Negro League statistics, you need to understand some of those differences. Focusing specifically on 1934, I've made some charts that attempt to illustrate just how black ball was different. We've been discussing one of the biggest differences already, the length of schedule. In the charts that follow, the American and National League Baseball is blue and the Negro National League is red. What we see in the chart on the left is that the average white team played a 153 game league schedule, while the average black team played just 38 games. The chart on the right shows us how many position players and pitchers the average team employed over the course of the season. As you see, the Negro League teams used much smaller rosters than their white counterparts. And that's the reason why simulations and projections can't just drop the Negro League teams into the major leagues. Their rosters are way too small to survive an everyday 154 game schedule. We'll zoom in on this by taking a look at the rosters of the two championship winning teams, the St. Louis Cardinals and the Philadelphia Stars. Listed here is everyone who played at least 5 games for these two clubs. Both sides have their 8 regular starters, of course, but beneath them, the Cardinals have 8 bench players to choose from, while the Stars have only 3. The difference is even more pronounced on the pitching side, with St. Louis using 11 different hurlers for at least 5 games during the season, while Philadelphia got by with just 6. This has all sorts of implications for how the respective teams could be managed. Negro League Baseball saw a lot less pinch hitting, pinch running, relief pitching, and defensive replacements than the white majors. And because the rosters were so small, versatility was a greatly cherished trait in blackball. On these Philadelphia Stars, this was embodied by right fielder Jake Dunn, who also played left field, center field, first base, second base, and shortstop during the season. These two pie charts illustrate pitcher usage for our two championship teams. The pie pieces represent the percentage of innings pitched by each team's number 1 starter, number 2 starter, number 3 starter, so on through the number 5 starter and up. What we see is that Cardinals ace Dizzy Dean pitched 23% of his team innings, while Philadelphia Slim Jones threw 33% of theirs. The Stars' number 1 and 2 starters, Jones and Webster McDonald, combined for 53% of the team's innings. Think about that. Over half of the team's innings pitched for the season came from just their top 2 pitchers. This sort of concentration of innings at the top of the rotation is typical of Negro League ball and impossible in white ball, and suggests that black batters were facing a consistently higher level of pitching than their white counterparts. Now let's take a closer look at what those batters were doing. These 4 charts compare the frequency of events for an average team per 100 games. Once again, the blue bars represent the AL and NL, the red the NNL. Starting at the upper left, you can see that runs scored is nearly a tie, 491 to 481. These numbers are per 100 games, so that translates to 4.91 runs per game in the white majors and 4.81 for the Negro National League, virtually the same. Moving to the right, we see hits, with the whites picking up roughly an extra hit per game. To the right of that, extra base hits. Surprisingly, the whites hit a lot more doubles and nearly twice as many homers as the blacks. The Negro Leagues have a slight edge in triples. In the lower left, walks and strikeouts, with the major leaguers walking more and striking out less. And at the lower right, we see the importance of small ball in the black game, with many more stolen bases and a lot more sacrifice bunts. Now, there's something about these figures that doesn't add up for me. We saw the whites getting more hits, more extra base hits, and more walks, but scoring virtually the same number of runs. This doesn't make sense. These are the hitting slash figures for the two leagues, with the American and National Leaguers doing a lot more hitting than the Negro National League. And in this chart, we see runs scored nearly even on the left, and runs created calculated by Bill James's basic formula on the right. The black ball statistics project to be worth 3.80 runs per game. They actually score an extra run more than that. How is that possible? I can offer three explanations. We saw on the last slide how the Negro Leaguers hit considerably fewer doubles than the white majors. And this is something I've always found to be true when comparing white ball and black ball statistics. Baseball-wise, there's no good reason for this, and it suggests to me that a good number of two-base hits never found their way into the newspaper box scores or the stats compiled from them. I'm convinced doubles are consistently underreported in the database, and that's the biggest cause of the discrepancy we see here. But there are two other factors I'd like to mention that probably drove up run scoring in black baseball. The first, which we've already touched upon, is the running game. There's a statistic I like to use, stolen base attempts per 100 times on base, to get a handle of how often a team runs. Unfortunately, we have no caught stealing records for the Negro Leaguers. So instead, I left out the caught stealing and calculated stolen bases per 100 times on first, which is the chart on the left. On the right is a baseball reference statistic they call run scoring percentage, which is the percentage of base runners who wind up scoring a run. Both of these figures are designed to illustrate the use of the running game, and as you see and probably expected, the Negro Leaguers ran a lot more and a lot more successfully than the whites. And that, of course, is going to increase runs scored compared to the formula projection. The second factor is fielding. The two metrics illustrated here are defensive efficiency, which is the percentage of batted balls turned into outs, and fielding percentage, the percentage of chances handled cleanly without an error. In both cases, the white leagues are better at fielding the ball than their black counterparts. I can offer a few reasons why this would be the case. Black teams often played on inferior fields and rarely got to take infield practice, which was a daily ritual in white baseball. And the smaller talent pool in black baseball frequently pushed players toward more demanding positions than they would play if more options were available. A good example of this can be found in the double play combination for the 1946 champion Newark Eagles. Their second baseman was Larry Doby, and the shortstop was Monty Irvin. Both men, of course, became outfielders when they moved to the white majors. And lastly, the running game that we spoke of earlier puts added pressure on the defense, forces more throws, and ultimately more mistakes. So how good were the teams of the 1934 Negro National League? I've created a few charts for each club that attempts to illustrate where the team's strengths and weaknesses were and how they might have stacked up against broader competition. We'll start with the hapless Cleveland Red Sox, who finished last in the league with a woeful 3-22 one-loss record. What we're doing on this page is looking at various statistics and showing where the club ranks in that stat in both the Negro National League and the totality of Major League Baseball. On the left, starting with winning percentage, Cleveland ranks 8th out of 8 teams in the NNL and 24th out of 24 major league teams. In other words, dead last. And there's a whole lot of 8th, 24th on this page. The Sox are dead last in runs for per game, next to last in runs against, last in batting average, on base percentage, and slugging percentage, next to last overall in ERA and WHIP, and next to last in the league in strikeout to walk percentage, a stat in which the black teams ranked consistently higher than the whites. Down below, last in fielding percentage and defensive efficiency. Cleveland actually climbs to 6th in the league in stolen bases per times on first, but falls to last again in run scoring percentage. This is just a pathetically bad team across the board. Now let me explain this chart, which attempts to provide a snapshot of the team's overall level of play. The statistic here is wins above replacement per 154 games. There's a lot to be skeptical about using WAR with Negro League statistics, but for big, broad overviews and generalizations, I think it can serve a purpose. The minus 25 on the left is the team's overall total of WAR, 25 games worse than replacement level. And at each position on the diamond, you see that position's WAR figure. The color coding is gold for an all-star, none present, green for a capable major league regular, and red for below replacement level. What we're seeing is that the Red Sox entire infield and pitching staff were below replacement level, while the outfielders barely made it to a minimally acceptable level. If I had to select a major league team to compare these Red Sox to, I'd go with this past season's record-setting Chicago White Sox, losers of 121 games. Chicago's miserable 253 winning percentage is more than double that of Cleveland's, and I suspect the White Sox, bad as they were, would romp over Cleveland in a 7-game series. Next up, the Philadelphia Backrack Giants, a midseason addition to the league, who finished with a 5-20 mark. The Backracks stocked their roster with veterans from the Eastern Colored League of the 1920s, players whose names would be familiar to the ticket-buying public, but who were almost universally well past their primes. 7th and 23rd on these charts translates to better than only the Cleveland Red Sox, and accounts for the Backracks' winning percentage and entire offense. The pitching is just slightly worse than mediocre, but the team's veterans can still handle the leather and were one of the league's better defensive clubs. Replacement level, if you're not familiar with the concept, is the level of a player well below major league average who should commonly be available to add to a roster. They say a team of replacement players would finish a 162 game schedule with about 50 wins. The Backracks wind up at -1, just slightly below that level. They show one star level player, rookie left fielder Ed Stone, who would enjoy a long career, mostly with Newark, and make 3 East-West games. The Backracks had a few more big league level players, but some big holes at third base and center field. The center fielder Crush Holloway had been a star in the 1920s, but at age 37 had become an embarrassment. The pitching staff was another collection of Eastern Colored League old-timers with little to nothing left in the tank. My comparison for the Backrack Giants is the 1962-63 Polo Grounds era New York Mets, an expansion team who tried to appeal to old New York National League fans by stocking the roster with as many over-the-hill ex-Dodgers and Giants and their opponents as they could find, and wound up completely miserable on the field. The Baltimore Black Sox were another second half addition and played only 13 games, none of them in Baltimore. They won 3, lost 8, and tied 2. It says something about the bottom of the Negro National League that Baltimore's 273 winning percentage, the equivalent of a 44 and 122 record, was only the third worst percentage in the league. What I find most interesting about this team is that they finished first in the Negro Leagues and second overall in runs for, but dead last in runs against. The average Baltimore Black Sox game was a 9-6 loss. The Black Sox have one star level player, 39-year-old former Hilldale player George Tank Carr at third base. In 3 games, Carr went 6 for 11 with a homer and 2 walks. Remember what I said about players being pushed to more demanding positions when the talent pool is shallow? The Black Sox second baseman is manager Rap Dixon, an outfielder on real teams. Rap's kid brother Paul is one of those -5 outfielders dragging down an otherwise decent lineup. But the real weight came from that dreadful pitching staff. The team's 5 starting pitchers show ERAs of 8.36, 16.20, 27 even, 5.40, and 33. The 33.00 ERA belonged to 17-year-old rookie Leon Day, a future Hall of Famer. My comp for the Black Sox is the 1932 Philadelphia Phillies, who, like Baltimore, led their league in runs scored while finishing last in runs against by a wide margin. We don't know anything about the Black Sox home in Chester, Pennsylvania, but the Phillies played in a tiny bandbox called the Baker Bowl, whose towering left field fence was just 281 feet from home plate. The fence was regularly adorned with a Lifebuoy soap advertisement, which inspired the saying, "The Phillies use Lifebuoy, but they still stink." Next, the Nashville Elite Giants, who finished with an 18-28-1 record, winning just under 40% of their games. Nashville's statistics suggest this should have been a much better team than they were. Their winning percentage was just 18th in the majors, but they were 11th in runs scored and 10th in runs against. Bill James's Pythagorean theorem suggests this team should have finished with a 521 winning percentage and won 24 games instead of 18. I attribute the difference to two factors. This was a very talented but very young team that probably made a lot of youthful mistakes. And the Elite Giants spent the entire second half of the season as a road team, which could not have helped performance. The figures here show that manager Candy Jim Taylor's club was pretty good at everything but fielding and were the runningest team in baseball. The Elite Giants were solid all around the diamond with no red negatives at any position. The star at third base is Felton Snow, who had an excellent season at the plate and whose defensive metrics are apparently very strong. The strength of this squad was its youth. Shortstop Sam Bankhead, second baseman Sammy T. Hughes, right fielder Wild Bill Wright, left fielder pitcher Tom Parker, and starting pitchers Andy Porter and Bob Griffith were all under 24 years of age. Most of them went on to have long, successful careers. My comp for the Elite Giants is the 1992 Cleveland Indians, shown here in their 1932 throwbacks. Like Nashville, the tribe had an exciting young core, Lofton, Baerga, Bell, and Tomey, to name a few. And like Nashville, that core would win a pennant a few years later in a new home. Jacobs Field for the Indians in 1995, and the city of Baltimore for the Elite Giants in 1939. Next, the Newark Dodgers, 17 wins, 17 losses, one tie. With three 400 hitters, it's not surprising to see Newark first overall in the three offensive categories. But how does the team first in batting average, first in on-base percentage, and first in slugging percentage finish just third in runs scored? Their pitching is pretty bad, and so is their fielding. And in base running, I suspect that first in run scoring percentage had more to do with the Dodgers' team batting average of 330 than it did with their base running abilities. I cannot wrap my head around the fact that a team with three 400 hitters couldn't find a first baseman with an OPS plus better than 89, but here it is. I hope that first baseman, Jim Starks, was at least a smooth fielder. But for all their hitting, the Dodgers were done in by a 5.98 team ERA. My comparison for the Newark Dodgers is those 1894 Phillies who featured four 400 hitters, but could only finish fourth in the league thanks to a team ERA of 5.63. Now we get to the Negro National League's best three clubs. The first half champion Chicago American Giants struggled in the second half and ended with a 28-20-3 record. They were not a good hitting team, and their pitching, which had been the league's best in the first half, fell off a bit overall, but was still a strength. Befitting a Dave Malarcher side, the American Giants were outstanding in the field and on the base paths. That gold 10 in center field is Turkey Stearns, who was the best position player in blackball in 1934. The -3 in right field is football star Joe Lillard, keeping in shape during his off season. First baseman Mule Suttles and shortstop Willie Wells were solid, but not outstanding, as they had been together earlier in their careers in St. Louis and would be again later in Newark. I suspect Chicago's Shoreling Park, a notorious pitcher's park, had a lot to do with the pair falling short of expectations. The American Giants spent 3 seasons in the Second Negro National League, featuring a Hall of Fame core of Stearns, Suttles, Wells, and Willie Foster, and while they always contended, they always fell short of the crown. This reminds me of the early 1980s Montreal Expos, who featured their own Hall of Fame core of Tim Raines, Gary Carter, and Andre Dawson, but just enough holes to consistently fall short of the title that they seemed destined for. Though they failed to make the playoffs, finishing second in each half of the split season, the Pittsburgh Crawfords were the league's second best team overall with a 47-27-3 record. Their star-studded offense, Gibson, Charleston, Bell, etc., was very good, but the Crawfords' real strength was their pitching. Satchel Paige was outstanding, of course, but William Bell was also excellent, and the other pitchers, Bert Hunter, Sam Streeter, Harry Concannon, Leroy Matlock, and Rosie Davis, gave the Craws the deepest staff in blackball and one of the best in all of baseball. The whole pitching staff reaches star level, as do catcher Josh Gibson and first baseman Oscar Charleston, of course. Cool Papa Bell in center lands just below the star level, while solid big league regulars can be found nearly everywhere on the field. The would-be exception, right fielder Jimmy Crutchfield, shows up with a negative WAR, but played in his first of 3 East-West All-Star games in 1934 and was generally held in high regard. For a comparison to the Pittsburgh Crawfords, I turn to the strike season of 1981, the only time in history the American League and National League resorted to a split season. The Cincinnati Reds and St. Louis Cardinals each had the best overall records in their divisions, but finished second in each half and failed to make the playoffs. I went with St. Louis over Cincinnati because, like the Crawfords, the Cardinals would win a championship the very next season. Finally, the Negro National League champion Philadelphia Stars, with a 39-18-10 record and .684 winning percentage that was the best in all of baseball. And this is your classic pitching and defense team. First overall in ERA, WHIP, and defensive efficiency, second only to the Crawfords in strikeout to walk ratio. The Stars' offense was less than mediocre, but the strong defensive spine of second baseman Dick Say, shortstop Jake Stevens, and center fielder Pete Washington was the perfect complement to stellar pitching and led Philly to the crown. First baseman Judd Wilson falls just short of gold star level by a few percentage points, but was by far the team's best hitter and position player. But the real force is that plus 33 pitching staff, the best in baseball. The negative at third is Dewey Creasy, the would-be manager of the Cleveland Red Sox who skipped out on the worst team in baseball to win a title in Philadelphia. My comp for the pennant-winning Stars is the 1963 LA Dodgers, another archetypal pitching and defense champion featuring Sandy Koufax in the role of Slim Jones. And I can't help but wonder what might have happened in a championship series between the Stars and the World Series winning St. Louis Cardinals. The Cards are much more balanced than the Stars, excellent at pitching, but also quite good offensively. They hold a solid edge in run scoring, but Philly counters with that with the best pitching staff in baseball. The Cardinals are one of white baseball's most dynamic teams on the base paths, so base running winds up a wash. And while the Cards commit fewer errors, the Stars can pick it defensively with anybody, as shown by baseball's best defensive efficiency. These two charts suggest a very even series, with neither team having a clear edge. Like Philadelphia, St. Louis features a talismanic bat at first base in the form of Ripper Collins. Numerically, the Stars seem to hold a slight edge, but it's very slight, and the series would probably be a toss-up. I like to think it would have come down to a showdown between the two spectacular aces, Dizzy Dean and Slim Jones. Segregation deprived America of the opportunity to witness this classic, but the new statistics and elevated status of the Negro Leagues allow us to animate these players and teams in the interior stadiums of our imagination. I'd like to dedicate this presentation to my dear friend David Lawrence, with whom I've spent many an hour debating how good were they. Wishing you all the best, my friend. I'd like to thank our collaborators, Lifeline Sports, Community Cup Classic, Panache 5, The Partnership, and yours truly. And special thanks to our most valuable partner, Cuyahoga Arts and Culture.